Welcome to Old Path and this study through the last book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation. We are currently in the 8th chapter. We come to the 4th and the 5th trumpets today. We're probably going to leave at least the last one, maybe two for next week, or I should say the last one, and then it gets into other details that are on the side of it. So the first one, the 4th, it doesn't have a great deal of description, but you're going to notice that in the 5th and the 6th of the trumpets and into the 7th, there starts to become a lot of amazing detail. So when we get to that particular part, you'll see kind of it really expands. In fact, by the time that we get finished with the 6th seal, there's quite a bit of difference in distance, if you will, between the details of the 6th and the 7th, with a lot of other information that's given. So I want to address something before we get going in this, and that is when it comes to presupposition. And we all have them. You know, we presuppose things about the text. We believe, in this case, Book of Revelation, the presupposition that people are going to sit in one camp or another is the details that we get are literal, and they're something that are going to be occurring in the future. And as far as all the middle parts of this, most will agree that it's these things eventually will get to the forever kingdom. Heaven will be an eternal thing. But how you get to it and how you read the things in the text here, you presuppose that, if you're of the view that I am, that all these things are literal and they are in the future. If you presuppose that everything is history and it's already taken place, and just about all of it fits somewhere in human history, that's another presupposition. So you presuppose before you even crack open the first sentence in Revelation 1:1, if you're going to come to it with the approach that this book that I'm about to read really doesn't speak of anything in the future until you get to the end of the chapters, and then it becomes a forever thing. But everything else that we see, other than the assessment of chapters 2 and 3, then everything else there is allegory, it's symbols and things like that. And all of the things that we see in it represent something or some personage from history. Now, if that's the presupposition, either one, and so just so that people don't, try to play the devil's advocate here, whatever your presupposition is, if your presupposition is incorrect, then unfortunately, everything that you do after that is going to be incorrect. So it's like mathematical equations that are very detailed and take many steps. If you make an error in the beginning of that, I don't care how good your math is down the line, your outcome is going to be wrong. So we take the approach on this that it is literal and that these things are future. So interestingly enough, I was reading something, and some people believe that what you find in the 5th seal that we'll look at is speaking kind of back towards the French Revolution. So they try to take the details of this and make it fit bits and pieces of the history of the French Revolution. Now, for people who are going to try to do that and fit all of this stuff into some bits of history, starting with the fall of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans, and then through kind of medieval history, and then into Renaissance and all that stuff, goodness, that's the presupposition. And it makes you look for stuff in history that just straight up does not fit, as we're going to see here today. So, especially when we get to the 5th seal, because there are some very literal things here. But I want to remember, when it comes to what we read here, let's make sure, just because what John is describing to us is really hard for us to try to understand if it's possibly literal, that doesn't mean that we have to start either making wild speculations, I guess is a good word for it, wild speculations about it, and trying to find some way to make it other than real and other than literal, so you start looking for historical things. John is looking at something, if, as I believe it is, literal in future. The world has never seen anything like this. The world has seen calamity for sure, but the stuff that we're going to see in the 5th of the trumpets here, mankind has never seen anything like it. So try to put yourself in John's shoes here of trying to give a description of what you're seeing. It's like watching the most horrific movie that you've ever seen, And I just get the impression it would be like me if I'm watching everything that he is seeing. If I saw it, side by side with him, this would be that kind of thing where you just stand there with your mouth open, and I don't even know how to describe to you what I just saw. So even if we've been in some kind of a circumstance in our lives where we're observers of something that you're just at a loss for words, magnify that 1,000 times with what he's about to see here. So what we're going to find characteristically about these things, again, if we're taking a literal interpretation, don't get tripped up on the idea that you can believe in these things being literal, though they've never been seen by human eyes before, aside from John, who saw them as God revealed them to him, but he didn't actually watch them like we would see them taking place, or if we were one of those on earth at the time. The church won't be here. But if you were there and you watched this in real time and you were one of the people on earth, it's like something out of the most terrifying horror movie that man could ever think of. So that's the kind of stuff that we're seeing here. Now, by the time that we get to the 5th of the trumpets, nothing is the same in this book going forward, because the attention is no longer things within the creation itself, as much as it is now man has become the object of the wrath of God, and it begins to affect people on an individual and a personal level. That starts at the 5th seal. Now, these other things have effect on them. There's no question about that. The seals did. It's going to affect the way that you live your life. But now there are things being released on the earth that are going to attack humans directly. And interestingly enough, by the time that we get to the 6th of these trumpets, mankind will know desperately how horrible things are, and they will realize that they have an option here, but they refuse to bow the knee before God. It's an amazing, amazing thing. We'll see that when we get to it next week. But suffice to say this, by the time that the 5th seal is over with, it is unimaginable the horror that is happening on earth. We cannot look at anything in the history of man, and I don't care how awful we've seen, but usually it's what man does to other man that is the most horrendous and mind-blowing things that we see, the cruelty of man. But we've never seen something like this, where demonic things are actually released on earth and they are going after people. That's what we read today. So once again, this is one of those things that we will study things in the Bible, and it's great for us to be able to say, we want to make sure we understand this particular part of the passage because it's an important bit of history, or it's an important bit of how does God operate, or how is it that we're supposed to conduct ourselves in this life. Those kind of things. We really need to know those details. Let's be reminded, though, we are studying a part of history future that has obviously not yet taken place, but it also doesn't involve us. We're not here for it. So you might ask the question, why would we want to be studying these things if it doesn't affect us directly? And I would put a few of these things forward. Even if you're not going to be, trying to rehearse the exact details of this. First of all, it, in my own heart, blesses me to know that my God has loved me and given himself for me, that I could escape these things. And it is my faith and my trust in him that makes it where I can be spared from these things. It makes me just love him and thank him more each day for what he has shown to me in his mercy and grace. And it gives me the ability to tell people these are the things that the Bible says are coming, but none would have to go through this if they would but come to know him here and now and be spared from these things. And going further than even that, it's not that we come to know him because we're afraid of these things. In fact, that's something down the line that we can look at this stuff. But it's more important that he loves me enough to have paid the price because he desires that I am with him, and that I'm gathered to him as he presents us before the Father someday down the road. Those kind of things, and that I can have the comfort and the peace of knowing that my life here is known to him, how many days I have, but when this life is over and I'm gathered to him, there's no uncertainty in that. We want to be able to share that with an unsaved world. And so some of the details, just to know about, hey, there are things coming upon this earth that no man has ever seen before. John was left with the impossible task of trying to describe in human terms, whether it's his day or ours. It's not just because he didn't have more information that he could give. We haven't seen anything like this. So mankind will never see anything like this until the events begin to unfold. So John is put in that impossible position of trying to describe something where we'd be able to maybe look outside and go, oh, he's talking about that. There's nothing to compare it to. So keep that in mind, being reminded that God has kept us from this horrible, horrible future that is awaiting this world and the men and women who refuse him. Here, this offer that he has made to man to be reconciled, these are the people who will refuse that. Whether they're alive now or they're going to be born later, I don't know. Depends on how long God gives us on this earth. No one knows that day. But it sure seems like it's getting closer by the day. Now, one last thing, I record this on what is Halloween night, or Halloween day rather, and Halloween night is when everybody does their things, but it's also just days before the election here in this country, so there's a lot taking place. Big things happening in Israel, the potential of a ceasefire up in the north, and really it wouldn't be a temporary thing. It looks like they're going to try to find some resolution to things. So if that's the case, that means that we are hoping to have our trip be able to come up next year in March. So with all that being said, I'll just throw this out too. As far as the website is concerned, we're really trying to make sure that more and more content gets put there. It's something that it's kind of work in process, and I have some people working with me on it. So if you go to our website, I also want to make sure that you know that the ministry that sent us out, which was Calvary Old Path in Cyprus, their website has changed to Calvary Chapel Cyprus. That was our original name. They've changed it back. If you send support to us, it goes through them and then it gets back here to us so that a record can be kept of it. It's we're all part of the same umbrella of ministry. But if you donate online, you would do so through Old Path Theology, not Calvary Chapel Cyprus or not Old Path of Cyprus. It's through here, Old Path Theology, which is the website for this ministry. I keep these videos there. I also keep the audios there too. So if you'd rather just listen to these or download the MP3s and just put them in some kind of a file that you can listen to them away from a computer or however it is that you do, those are available as well. So with that being said, we get to the end of chapter 8. Let's turn there. Let's take a look at it. And we'll look at what is the fourth trumpet. It is not, there isn't a great deal of detail. It's what's said at the last part in verse 13 that really kind of changes the whole direction of this book in a very, very difficult to fully grasp kind of a way, but we can still look at it and we can understand what's being said here. If we don't try to read stuff into it, then it becomes opinion. But if we end up letting it speak for itself, the only thing that we have trouble trying to figure out, what exactly is he looking at? And the simple answer is we don't know. He's giving us basically, think of some kind of an animal that you've never seen in your whole life before, and you're trying to describe it having seen it for the first time, having never seen anything like it. That still happens from time to time in our world today. Some new species of something gets discovered and nobody's ever seen anything like it. So how do you describe it? What can you compare it to that people have seen before? There's simply no way. So there's a lot of that. It's like this. So let's pray and we will look at the text. Father, thank you so much that we can come to your word and we can be instructed, that you can give us these ears to hear, as your word would say, the things that we're supposed to be paying attention to here and now as far as the church is concerned, but also those things to come that we may warn others, that it might be a tool that we can use, that we could let people know that they could escape such things that will be coming in future if we would come to know you here and now and be spared from those things, and to enter into that relationship that you have with your flock that you speak about, the love that you have for your flock, the sheep, and that you're that good shepherd. May we understand these things and understand them well. I thank you for those that you brought to the program and pray that you would bless them and bless their study in your word, I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So verses 12 and 13, it's the close of chapter 8, last two verses. And verse 12 says this: Then the fourth angel, so the fourth trumpet, sounded, and that, remember, the sounding is the trumpet sounding is a heralding. It's to say, hey, attention everybody, something's coming, there's something that's about to take place. So in this case, it's the fourth of those. That sound goes out. People know that something's happening. And we looked at this again. The question was, is this a trumpet that's heard? I was asked this question. Is it something that they're told about? And I believe that yes, I believe that the people here on earth, I don't believe that it's a trumpet sounding in heaven to let the people who are there know that something else is taking place on earth. I believe this is for the people on earth who hear these things, because it is, if we're using the trumpets as the sounding and why they had been done historically, especially in the nation of Israel and other nations, again, it's a way of warning that something is about to take place. And there's other times where it was a trumpet of gathering people and it was a joyous occasion. So we see instances of both of those types of things spoken of in both the Old and the New Testament. So I believe this is an announcement of a pending judgment that's about to unfold, and it's being said to the people, though it's being trumpeted from the angels that are being sent. You'd be able to hear it in heaven. Everything's being watched from there, at least from the personages that are mentioned here. So they'd be aware of it. But I believe that this is intended for the people on earth to hear it as well. So it says, now the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. Now, a lot of questions about this. Is this a natural phenomenon? Does God use the smoke that we've already heard about? There's like all kinds of atmospheric things. We know that stuff has hit the earth and it's damaged the waters, all the waters, not just the oceans, streams and springs. And there are other parts of the creation that have been heavily impacted by the first of the trumpets that were sounded here. So there are some that would say, well, yeah, of course, no matter what, however you get to that, if God's using the calamity that's already taken place and makes it where it obscures a third of the amount of light given off, or that a third, like if you're looking up in the sky, instead of seeing a full thing, a third of it's missing. There's a couple of different views that there could be on this. Is it literally just like a third aren't even there in view? Or is it that everything is seen as like 33% less visibility? And is it something that God creates, or is he using the natural phenomenon? Is that the case? Then there's the added part of this, that during the day and during the evening it was diminished by a third. Does that mean that the amount of hours that the sun would shine, there's much less of that during the course of the day? Now, some people would see that as that seems almost impossible, but we're only, gosh, it's this Sunday we're doing the time change here, and in North Texas, there's the difference between when it's the shortest days versus the longest days is at least a couple, maybe as many as almost 3 hours of difference in the amount of daylight that we get here. I've never actually, sat there to figure out from the first light to the last light how many hours one time of the year versus the other, but it's significant here, more so than even when I lived in California. So I do understand that it could be that as well, or both things at the same time. That because it's at night, but it's a third, and so again, there's a lot of questions as to why is it done by a third, and again, just a lot of speculation. All that we know is that God says a third of it. It's going to be much more complete at the end of these by the time that we get to the bowls. So anyhow, he sees this. This is what's taking place. This is the last of the purely signs in the heavens kind of things. Now, if nothing else, anybody who's watching this by this time, and clearly because of the other things that have been taking place, and especially if they're hearing the trumpet sound, there is not a doubt in anybody's mind left that doesn't already realize this is the time that there is calamity on the earth, that God is judging the earth. Even the atheist by this time's got it figured out, that there's no natural explanation for the things that have taken place. We've made it through the first 6 seals, the 7th seal revealing these trumpets. By the time that 6th seal was open, remember what they were saying: save us from the wrath of the one who sits upon the throne and from the Lamb. So these were guys who are saying, rocks, fall on us and hide us. There's no question that they know what's taking place. It's just getting worse and it's more severe. But they have not seen anything yet. So when we get to verse 13, it says, now I looked and I heard an angel flying through the midst of the heavens, and he said with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe. There are 3 of them. Now, it says, to the inhabitants of the earth. So that tells us who is being looked at here. It's not anybody in heaven. It's not anybody it's not even the people that have, let's say, died in a place of rejection. Those people that are waiting to be resurrected, to be judged, the second death that we read about in chapter 20 of the book. But this is the people that are actually, the tribulation is well underway. The rapture of the church has taken place. And all that's left is the unbelieving. And again, you will also have the people who will die during this time, who are people that would be martyrs, because we know that there will be martyrs future to this time. So among this group are people who have come to faith, I'm sure, by the time that all of these things have taken place, and they're just trying to exist. Again, the trying to wrap your mind around just the day-to-day life of a person during this time, nothing compares to it. There's just simply nothing. Man has had to endure times of war and whatnot when every single day they don't know for sure if they're going to make it through the day. They don't know if they're going to live or die. In this case, that's the same situation that many have faced throughout man's time on earth. But this is different because now God is judging the earth and everyone knows it. So even for the believer, you just don't know what you've got, because there will be martyrs. I'm sure many of those people, think about that. Many of these people who are watching this may very well have lost family or friends or whatever else who are also believers by this time. Again, just stuff that goes through your mind. What would it be like to be there at that time? I don't want to know, but your mind still kind of just goes, what would it be like for those people? There's just no way, I don't think, to even begin to grasp the gravity of that question. So we know who it is. It's coming upon the people that are on the earth. And why? Because of the remaining blasts of the trumpets of the three angels that are about to sound. That's why there are those three different woe. And a woe is kind of like alas. It's an interjection, like an exclamation point. It's like, whoa. This is what's about to take place. It's come to this. Alas, these things are taking place. So when you find this word for it, for woe, it's used quite extensively in the Gospels. You'll find Paul will say, woe to me if I preach not the gospel, those kind of things. It's a way of just what a grievous thing it would be to have this pronounced. And so this is a pronouncement to the people. What a grievous thing this is. Alas, it's come to this. Woe. These things are about to take place. These next three trumpets are going to be unlike anything that has ever been seen before. And even after those, it will nonetheless get even worse. The seventh of the trumpets is going to reveal the last of the judgments, which are the bowls, and they're the worst of the worst. So what we see next is, once again, beyond anything that we can really fully sink our teeth into. I don't think any of us can really fully grasp what we're about to read. We can't. It's not been seen. John's doing his best to try to explain it, and I'm sure it's got to be so unbelievably troubling, because again, we can watch movies, we can see things, we can observe things that are terrifying and horrific and everything else. But like with a movie and whatnot, you can walk away and go, yeah, it's just, it's still a movie. Whatever happened to all the people that, the carnage that happened to them, they went home at the end of the day and everything was fine. In this case, what John's seeing is as sure as the world that's in front of him at the time, this is going to happen eventually. And he's getting kind of a preview of what's going to be taking place in the future. And he's having to write down the details. Mind-blowing. So what we have here, it runs verses 1 through 12 of chapter 9, and it's what he ends up seeing, and he gives a lot of detail on this. So interesting that he gives the amount of detail that he does. So chapter 9, verse 1 says, now the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Really interesting imagery that's here, because it's a star, but then it's referred to as him, which is really kind of weird. And notice that he doesn't say it's a star falling like it's happening in real time as he's watching it. Rather, he instantly looks at this personage that is there. They've already fallen. So when he sees what he sees here, this person to whom the key to the bottomless pit is given, that's when he realizes whoever this person is, and I'll give you the different views of what it is. And to be honest with you, I don't know. I cannot say one way or the other. I know I might favor a couple of different possibilities, but any one of several would be understandable, and you could make the case for it. I don't doubt that there is for me, there's no doubt that this is a personage that's been given. God brings them up to heaven and gives them, or wherever he does it, he grants them to have the key that opens this pit that doesn't have a bottom, is what it's called, the bottomless pit. So John sees, the next thing that he sees is what to me is an angel, fallen angel, demon, call them what you will. And people have these varying degrees. Now, there are some interesting things, because the stuff that comes out of the bottomless pit, people would call them fallen angels, demons, and people have different classifications. Sometimes people put them in different categories. Some people would just say that there are degrees of angels. Some that had, what their rebellion was so grievous that they're in a different category, because we know that there are those who roam upon the earth. And so the demon-possessed people that we see in the Old Testament and the New Testament alike, you've got that kind of a situation that there are spirits that are able to work in the physical, the physical world. These guys are locked away. And we get a little glimpse of that when you read through what what you read in 2 Peter chapter 3, also what you read in Jude. There's mentions of these angels that have been locked away until such a time, but they're separate. They're in this place we would call the abyss, or the bottomless pit, and they're released at this time. So they're not like the ones that are here on earth. So some would say degrees of angels. Others would say, no, the angels are the fallen angels are the ones that are in there. There are demons that work among us in people, or they might put it in reverse. Again, there's a lot of different views of this. And so this actually is not something about demonology. This is not learning about the nature of demons or fallen angels. So there's no sense in getting into the tall grass of that, because again, even that, nobody can really absolutely nail down what's a demon, what's an angel, what are their limitations, where can they operate. I've never heard anybody give a way of saying absolutely this is how that works. So we'll call them demons, we'll call them fallen angels. Just sometimes I might even say them interchangeably, but we know characteristically there are some things very different about both. Think of the ones that asked to be thrown into the pigs that Jesus cast out of the Gadarean man that was demon possessed, Legion. Remember him, Mark chapter 4, 5. Think about that. And so they were here on the earth. They didn't want to be put away into the abyss. That's what they're asking not to be put into, where these things are about to be released. They realize there's a different place for them that some of them would be a part of. There's a lot that is potential. Or are they talking about when they're thrown in at a later time? Are they locked up at the same time that Satan is bound in this very same place? So when it tells us that Jesus comes back and he binds up Satan for 1,000 years, he's thrown into this that's about to be opened. So with all that said, this is certainly a person, because they're given a key and they're releasing things. So this star is a personage, if we want to call it. Now, here's what some of the options are. Some people would say it's the Antichrist. Others would say it's Satan. Others would say it's just one of the really, think high-ranking kind of fallen angels, like we think of Michael or Gabriel, of these high-ranking angelic class that serve God. Well, you would figure that there is probably a hierarchy in the opposite direction. We don't get a lot of detail there. But either way, this is a person who has the ability to take control of this. And if it's a star, quote unquote, that has already fallen from the sky, then you're talking about some flaming something that's hit the ground, but it's not sentient. You can't give it a key, and you can't have it open things, and it won't obey commands. So clearly it's an image that he is seeing. And again, the idea of fallen angels being related to as stars, you see that in Isaiah and other places as well. So it's not as though that's without precedent. Whoever this person is, and again, you have a few different options. A lot of people will have their own views of this, but let's just call it a personage, supernatural, and I believe that this is not a good angel, because it's fallen. So I believe that the fallen is intended to tell us a couple of things. Fallen as in cast down from heaven, that would only be the angels that rebelled. And fallen could also be a description of their status, that fallen in the sense that they're not God's messengers, they're not his servants, they're just working out what he wants done. So however you come down on that, the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of it like the smoke from a great furnace. So he's trying to give a description. The smoke that he saw coming up, what does it remind him of? Well, the only thing I could liken it to, John would say, it's like the smoke that comes out of a massive furnace. So again, is that part of, will that also be something that helps to obscure the daytime and the night and all that stuff, because these things happen seemingly in succession, though the timing between what we're going to see at the end of this or during this fifth trumpet to later things, there are a matter of months that some of these things take place, and we'll get to that in due course. So, smoke arose out of the pit, and the smoke of the great, the smoke of a great furnace. And so the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. So that gives us that description. Now, the fourth tells us that there's already a darkening that's taking place. Some may feel that that is already, like I had mentioned, from previous things that had taken place. This is in addition to that. And so it's just going to only continue what's been taking place. So it has that same effect on the natural world. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke, locusts came upon the earth, and to them were given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. Now, this is the first thing that we see. If we didn't know anything else, we would just think these are locusts, but they have a little bit of a different characteristic to them. But here's the situation when we really kind of peel back a little bit of the layers of it. If these are from the bottomless pit and there's smoke coming up like it's a furnace, then obviously he's making sure that if he's going to use imagery, he's going to use imagery that would make us understand. There's smoke coming from a burning and a heat that is there. Regular everyday locusts would not survive it. Regular everyday locusts don't have the ability to sting. So he's already here at this point trying to describe something in human terms best as he can to describe something that's never been seen on this earth before. So he's saying like a locust, but it had the ability to sting like a scorpion. So these are different. But if they're in the bottomless pit, there's no reason for us to believe anything other than they are supernatural things, and they are commanded, and they are able to torment mankind as part of the judgments. So do we want to call them demons, call them spirits, fallen angels, whatever they may be? Of course, people start to go, well, that can't be. I mean, we've seen pictures of angels. No, we've seen artist renditions of them, but we don't know what they look like. I mean, we've already seen what we looked at in chapters 4 and 5. There's stuff flying around in the heavens like, I don't know what that is. Look at what Ezekiel saw in his visions and the angels that were there with the eyes and everything else. Nobody has ever seen anything like this. So the idea that we would see something that he goes, locusts. It's the only thing I could think to liken them to. Locusts, although he doesn't say they're like, he just said locusts came out. Now, do they resemble locusts? Sure. But he starts to give us other characteristics, and that's when he says it's like this. So though he's able to speak of them as locusts in the way that they move and everything else, that still is going to leave us a little bit with an inability to fully grasp what he's talking about here. Now, I'm going to give you some homework on this, and there's just no way that we could touch it. If you read the book of Joel, and you look at the first 3 chapters in particular, the details that are there, you're going to be able to see that clearly was something that was being spoken of that would be taking place in the near future from the time that Joel wrote it, looking more towards the southern kingdoms. And it did take place like that. So the armies that would be advancing on them, Babylonian, of course, did come in just like that. If you're trying to say, what would it look like if a human army came in the way that the Babylonians did? And so he explains it. But when you read through chapters 2 and 3 in particular, well, even really starts even before that, chapters 1 and 2, you're going to find that there's some descriptions that really look identical to this. So did it happen with the Babylonians and did it happen to Judah? Yes, absolutely. That's what it looked like. But was it just a precursor? Was it a type of what would be coming in a much grander way, in much more terrifying way in the future? Absolutely, because there's some information that we'll get here. Again, do your side-by-side comparison, book of Joel, especially for chapters 1 and 2, and then into the third. Day of the Lord stuff is what's being referred to there. Now, when God judged Israel, or Judah rather, for their insubordination and for their lack of adherence to the law, were they being judged? And was it the day of the Lord? Was it the day of his anger and of his judgment? Absolutely. But they survived it. This is a much different matter. So Joel was looking at things that took place near future, but that also was looking well into the future of his day, even future to ours. So look at the parallels there. You'll find those to be quite interesting. And also you'll find it with Isaiah chapter 13, verses 9 and 10 will sound very similar to this, but the same kind of thing. Day of the Lord chapter that's speaking about these events. So it says in verse 4, so they were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth or any green thing or any tree, but only those men who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. Now, here's how you know it's clearly not locusts like we're thinking. Locusts don't have the ability to be commanded. And the last thing that a locust is going to do is get onto the land and not consume green things or trees or anything else. That's all that they ever eat. They don't attack humans. Well, these ones will. So notice it says here, now there's only the ones that do not have the seal of God on them. And so the seal of God is, if nothing else, at minimum, it is only the 144,000 that we have record of. There are some that would say that the saints are sealed, and that they have his name on their foreheads and all the rest of that, and yet we have martyrs. So I don't believe that either. I believe that this is speaking specifically only of those 144,000, and it's why we are given that detail back in chapter 7 about who they are and what are their qualifications. Why would they need to be sealed? Why would no harm need to be able to come to them? Because these judgments are going to be taking place, and they would be harmed if not that God preserves them through it. That's what we're getting here. It's explained to us in detail. Don't go after the grass, the green things, the stuff that locusts usually will consume. And they did so, if you remember, in the Exodus, the ones that came there just devastated things. One of God's judgments at that time. But unlike that time where they just consumed everything, here they're not touching crops or anything else. Only those who did not, and it says men, but think mankind, because women are just as responsible before God for their rejection as men. So men is used in the generic sense of mankind, men and women alike. So men who do not have the seal of God on their forehead, and they were not given authority to kill men, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. Now, it's an interesting thing because people say, well, they're like locusts. Does that mean that they're that tiny? We think of demons as being huge, or supernatural beings. We think of them as being big. And that's because of Hollywood. That's because of stories. That's because of all kinds of things. And again, there are angelic beings that interact with man, and they seem to be our regular size. So we're thinking, if we're looking at that, we're thinking, well, they almost be the exact same. But we'll notice that God has these supernatural creatures and whatnot that don't look like anything that we've seen before. So let's not get so hung up in what is their physical appearance. Are they larger? Are they smaller? Whatever they may be. That part doesn't necessarily matter. Here's what we know. They are not able to kill men, but they are able nonetheless to inflict these grievous wounds on them by stinging them. Now, again, people start to think about it. If we're going to do this, scorpions and stings and all the rest of it, is it using the same kind of venom? What is it, that's being spoken of there? Don't know. We're not told the details. Does God give them some kind of what we would think is just normal toxins and whatnot that they would have in their stings? I don't know. We're not told the details. And again, trying to wrap our minds around modern day things and trying to think that they would compute to this, let's just not get let's get our heads out of that and think we're not able to say he's using all natural causes to do these kind of things. This is so unusual. It's nothing like we've ever seen. So they were not given authority to kill, but to only torment men for 5 months. Now, here's an interesting thing, because there would be the question, if it's a matter of 5 months, why are we given that detail? That's really kind of odd. What's the significance of that? And is there any other place where there is any kind of precedent for some kind of a judgment taking that length of time? And we will know that from the flood, as far as Noah was concerned, that the water prevailed on the earth for 150 days, 5 months. Now, that could be coincidental, or is it that God is kind of that repetitious? It's a way of judgment, and that particular judgment is going to take the certain amount of time to run its course. Let's remember the water got to the level where it covered the entire earth after the 40 days, after the fountains of the deep, all that stuff that came up, and it buried the land. But once the land was buried, before it began to recede and come back into the earth and evaporate and all the things that it did, it was 150 days on the earth. So for that length of time, the whole earth stood underneath the water. Now, but that wasn't the first, that wasn't the last, that was just that particular part of it. Some people would see this as having that same significance, that for God, it's 150 days or for 5 months. Same thing, you're still, if you're basing it on 30-day months, 5 months or 150 days is the same thing. So, is that a significant thing? Well, it's significant enough to get a mention here what the length of it is. And probably more importantly is for us to remember that these things don't necessarily happen in rapid succession one after another. Because I don't have any reason to think that all of this is taking place. Could there be 5 months between the 5th and the 6th seal? Certainly, there could be. Or the things that are happening in the 5th seal, do they run into what takes place during the 6th? That works fine as well. So, again, people can speculate on that stuff, but the text doesn't tell us so that we can know for sure, aside from the fact that it gives the impression that one subsides before the next one starts. That's what we've thought going through this. But could there be overlap in these things where the problems one runs into another? Well, 4 could run into 5 in these trumpets here, because there's the smoke and there's the darkening and all that stuff, which continues into the 5th. So once again, it doesn't change anything. But there's something that here that the effect of this sting that happens has this ability to linger for 5 months. And here's what happens in that time. And again, this is why I'm very, very careful. It's a good time for me to do this. When I look at this kind of stuff here, this is not as bad as it'll ever get. I think of the torment that awaits the person that dies after having rejected Jesus and then has to look eternity in the eye and recognize the torment that is going to befall them for eternity. Not a long time, eternity, like no ending to it. That's why when I see the most evil people that this world has to offer up, and I think of those people in the Middle East who did the things that they did, when they die, I find no pleasure in that whatsoever, because I know what awaits them. I don't know who these people are. I know that there will be those who will be on the earth when Jesus comes back for the church, and when the tribulation begins, and all these things begin to happen. These will be real live people. There are people that, if this happens in the next years, and again, I'm not even thinking of setting a date. I'm just trying, for the sake of what I'm saying here, if this happened next year, people that I know of, people that I've met, people that I have acquaintance with, are going to endure this. And I have a hard time wrapping my head around that. Because it's just, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. The idea that this is going to be happening to people, perhaps even people that we know, it's almost too much to even want to acknowledge. So, 5 months, their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. So we would all know, I've never been struck by a scorpion, but anybody that has, or by a wasp or whatever else it may be, the intensity of that is really horrible. But imagine the intensity as being something that lingers for months on end with no respite. That's what's being said here. So think anything that bites, anything that stings, and the whatever pain may come from it, there'll be no end to it. Here's how bad it's going to get. In those days, men will seek death, and they will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. Wrap your mind around that. So, whatever happens to them, the torment from this sting is so bad that the alternative, I will kill myself rather than have to deal with the pain of this another day. And this is going to go on for 5 months. Now, there's always been this interesting thing. How is it that they would be able to survive their own attempt at suicide? And as far as I'm concerned, I've it's not something to joke about, but I've said, well, what if a person decides to, throw themselves in a wood chipper? How are they going to survive that? God would pull the plug on the wood chipper or stop the motor. He'll prevent it from taking place. So however it may be, if they were able to try to do something, they'd have to survive it. But because people could do things that no one could survive, they'll be prevented from doing it. That part we know. God will not let them be successful in the attempt. That's the issue. So death will flee from them. They will seek actively, and yet they will not be able to escape. So the shape of the locusts was like horses. So he identified them immediately, locusts, but not locusts like we think about, because more like horses. Now, is this saying that it's because of the faces, the length of them? How do you take a locust and a horse and come up with a hybrid of something that looks like both? Again, this is where people with great imaginations could try to take all these descriptions and draw it out. I don't care. It's going to still look like it was done by a 5-year-old, because it's not going to make any sense. But he's talking about them as horses. Now, some would say that's because of how quickly they are able to gobble up space, how quickly they can overcome something that they're chasing down. Is it a physical description? Is it both of those things? Any of those would work. We're not given enough detail. The shape of the locust was like a horse. So the shape would give the impression that it's more the body of it rather than the face. But some would say, no, it's actually more the face that's being spoken of, because if grasshoppers are so small, but they do have that longer face if you look at them from top to bottom. Anyway, again, this is where speculation can drive you crazy. The shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something that was like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. Goodness, where are we going with this? So, again, if you got one of those things where you just want to go, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and draw a locust that has a tail like a scorpion, but the body of a horse, face like a man, and it's got crowns. So he's not done with the description yet. I don't care what you're going to come up with. That thing is going to look so ridiculous. And yet we can go ahead and chuckle about it because of how absurd the whole thing is. But put yourself in John's place. John is seeing this. This has got to be something that he's just like, I don't ever want to see this again. How do you get this out of your mind? Because again, there are things that we'll see in our own lives and we just can't get it out of our mind. It's just kind of paper clipped there and there's no way to get away from it. Imagine being him, having seen this, and you're going to carry this with you for the rest of your days here on earth. This would haunt you. This is where I think God would probably have intervened and said, I'm going to kind of wipe your memory of that, because it'll keep you up at night for the rest of your life. But he may have, for as long as God gave him, still saw these things. So anyhow, there's something like gold. There's a couple of different possibilities. Is this just something characteristically about the coloring of these things that give the impression of something, an adornment on their head? Or is it literally a crown because of their ability? Some have speculated. Is it really a crown that we might think are an adornment to be a way of recognizing their rank or their ability or something? Again, there's just no good satisfactory answer to this. So it's not something I'll spend a lot of time on. I'll just take it as he gives it to us. So again, these locusts that have a tail, looks like a horse at some parts of it anyways, has a face like a man, and has crowns. He's not done. They had hair like a woman's hair, and that would give the impression, and again, a couple of different possibilities here, but the one that makes the most sense, they're thinking longer, but again, locusts with hair. Okay. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lion's teeth, or so they're carnivores, with faces or teeth like a carnivore. Now, they're not eating green things, they're not eating grass, they're not eating anything like that, so they're not that kind of a locust. And nothing tells us that they're biting humans, but they're using their tails. But their face has these teeth in it that reminds him of lions. Just, again, imagine. They had a breastplate that was like the breastplates of iron, and so something that was on their torso, or thorax is what actually the Greek word is here, gives us the word thorax. But that middle part, they had a breastplate that was on them. Now, is that natural, supernatural? Is it because they're adorned for war, or does he see them as an army that goes out? And again, there is a lot of interest in this, that if this is seen as when Joel shows it, he's speaking about the army of Nebuchadnezzar, but if we're using that as he was seeing something that was both fulfilled in the near future of Joel's time, but looking forward, still it's going to have that same look of an advancing army, and they're going to have that ability to look as though it's ready for war kind of a thing. So they had breastplates like them on them, like they were like iron. The sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. And they had tails like scorpions, and in their sting, or the sting was in their tails. Their power was to hurt men for 5 months, that 150 days, 5 months kind of a thing. Now, this is that place where I've heard people try to say, well, maybe John is actually seeing modern warfare. Maybe he's talking about attack helicopters here, because the sound of it is like, like horses running in chariots. There were no helicopters at the time, so he's giving something that sounds like a bunch of horses running with chariots, and the way that the ground would shake and everything else. This is, again, where it's the idea, if you're going to try to speculate, make sure that you don't do violence to anything else in the text. Helicopters would not come out of the bottomless pit. Locusts would, demons would, that have all of these characteristics like nothing we've ever seen. Let's not try to make this modern warfare. Let's make this what it is as far as the text is concerned. If we're going to take a literal interpretation of this and future, we're talking about demonic things that the world has never laid eyes on, though they exist. And they're in a different look at this point. Some would say that these were ones that were, again, going along with Jude and Peter and what they had to say and the stuff of Genesis 6, those ones who did whatever they did in chapter 6, and again, there's all kinds of debate on that, whether they were, actually intermingling with female, human females, and brought about these crazy, race of beings known as Nephilim. That's that whole debate that goes on there. Some would say that's what was thrown here, and they take on a different characteristic when they're loosed. God put them in there after that fall, when he judged the earth at the flood, and that's who's coming back out, but they look characteristically different. At that time, they took on the appearance of men, or had some, kind of way of looking like men. Anyhow, once again, this is where we get into a lot of speculation, and heavy speculation can end up leading to really, really bad places. So since we're not given the details, it's best not to go down that road. But in case you've heard somebody mention that, I just figured I'd throw it out because that's where it is right here. But if we stay with the text, we don't have to worry about rabbit holes that take us to some place that we can still never know. So they had tails that were like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men for these 5 months. So this is the duration of it. That's why we are finally given for the first time some kind of an indication of the length of time that the one of these judgments would be able to take place. So if nothing else, even if this fifth and the events go into what happens during the sixth, and the sixth just adds more stuff to it, all of those things could still be going on. Of the fifth trumpet carries over, and then the sixth trumpet happens, but it doesn't mean that one's brought to a close and the other one begins. And a lot of that will make sense when we get to the next chapter. So we won't be able to get there today for sure. So it says, now they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name is in Hebrew Abaddon, but in Greek it is Apollyon. Now, once again, here's a place where people really disagree on this. Because if you take a look at Abaddon, or Abaddon, if you look at that in the Hebrew, you'll find that that just simply means either one. Hebrew or Greek means destruction, and or the destroyer. When you look at the Old Testament usages, it really does kind of give more the impression of destruction as the thing that we would understand, a thing that is destroyed when destruction comes, not that it's personified. And so some people would say, well, this is really not a personage as much as it is, it's representative of the place that they come from. When these things, you know, what has the power to command them? Well, it's the place that they come from. They're acting by the dictates of the place from which they come, rather than it being a person that's actually over them, or an angel that is giving them instruction. Now, there's an angel that has already opened the bottomless pit. Some would say he's also known by this name, or there's another one that is kind of their leader. Greek would be Apollyon, and Hebrew Abaddon. I tend to favor the idea that they have one that commands them. Doesn't have to be the angel who opened the bottomless pit, but there seems to be a leader to them. But ultimately what they bring about is destruction, and yet you can't say total destruction, because men are not killed by them. Men are tormented by them. Nothing else gets destroyed. But the person that or whatever it is that commands them is referred to as destruction. That's the one who gives them their marching orders, if you will. They answer to him or to it. So again, you'll find people that we would consider as credible scholars that will disagree on whether this is a literal personage that's here, you know, some kind of a ranking, an overarching kind of a demon that's here, or if it's more that they just do the dictates of where they're from. So anyhow, you can find people on both sides that, and since we're not given the details on it, there's no sense in you know, saying, oh, it has to be this. It just, we're not told. So no sense in standing on it. Here's what we know. There's some really freaky things that come out of the bottomless pit that we know. We know that they are supernatural because there's nothing like them. They're not symbolic, they are literal, but there's something that we don't have any concept of because we've never seen them. They are told you can't destroy any of the physical things on the earth. You can only torment the men that God has not sealed. And it's going to be as though these people, when they are attacked by these things, will have a sting that is so grievous that the people will want to die, but God won't allow it to happen. And whatever takes place, whether it's one sting that lingers for 5 months, or they keep getting stung every day, or for however long it is, and this goes on for 5 months, 150 days, and man cannot escape it. So these things are able to do this, and at least, if nothing else, the effect of that sting will last for 5 months, or they could be tormented constantly during that time of 5 months, multiply being stung. We don't know. And somehow, some way, they have, it's a planned thing that they do, because they have something that gives them their marching orders. Let's just stay with all the things that we can. One woe is past. Behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things. The next one that we will get to next week is the 6th. It sounded, and a voice from the 4 horns, this is verse 13, of the golden altar, which is before God. So this is where the sound comes from. We'll get to this next week. And the angel who had the trumpet said, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So we're going to start to see another whole thing that's going to happen. And this is where it's going to start to have a very interesting culmination. Now, if they're coming from the east, that we'll see next week, where are they headed? And what does that have to do with the rest of the book? And that's why we have to realize this is very much Israel-centric. It's very much looking at the nation of Israel going forward. So we're going to pick up that at next week. But for today, 4th and 5th of the trumpets, and the releasing of these supernatural beings. Really, man is now the one who is being tormented or affected by all of the things that are taking place here. Of course, the physical creation will be as well, but this is the first time that you see since the early seals that man is really in focus here, and the devastation will be even greater of the number of people that are taken by percentage of the things coming than what we currently saw. So we'll pick that up next week at 6. So, not 6 o'clock, the 6th trumpet. If you have any questions on any of what I shared, please let me know, and I'll be happy to answer those. I can do that through the email. Again, our website is oldpaththeology.net. You can take a look around there at other things that we have. There's a blog there with some older content. We're going to be putting some newer stuff up here shortly. But that's everything that has to do with this ministry here in Texas. This has an email drop down there for contacting us. That's how you can do so, through email, or you can do so through the actual studies themselves on YouTube. You can interact with me there too. So again, contact us if you have anything that you'd like to discuss with us. We have a trip coming up next year to the Grand Staircase in June, which is can explain to you how the whole Grand Canyon took place and what it has to do with Noah's flood. We're going to be doing that. And if you'd like details on that trip, we also plan on going to Israel in March of next year. That's our hope, depending on what things are happening in the world, in that part of the world, with the conflict that's taking place there now. Anyhow, with any of those things, if you have any questions, contact me. And I'd love to hear from you. And I'll see you next week for the 6th trumpet.